about David, his good characteristics, because this is about the last Sunday we're going to see his good character. This is out of the 10th chapter of 2 Samuel, beginning with verses 8 through 19 today. And this lesson is entitled David's Victories. And what it shows us, what it teaches us is that Christians are in a warfare against sin and evil. And the more we desire to live for God, the greater the warfare will be. Have you noticed that the more you draw close to God, the more the enemy is going to come in and try to steal, rob, and destroy everything that you're trying to do for the Lord. So, we need courage, we need trust in God, and we need the help of one another. And in this account, where the surrounding nations continue to make attacks on Israel, we see here these many characteristics in David. And out of the necessity of self-defense, David was able to gain the territory that God had promised to the Israelites, because in David, God had found just the right man for this time. David was religious, he loved God, he was skillful, he was just, he was honest, and he was an excellent, skilled soldier. Now for the first time, the promise that God made to Abraham back in Genesis 15:18 was fulfilled. That promise in which God said to Abraham, "Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates." We're going to see that fulfilled in today's lesson. So this chapter gives the detailed account of David's war with the Ammonites and their allies, the Syrians. And ironically, it begins with a token of kindness from David to the son of the king of the Ammonites, because his father had died. And David wants to send a message of condolence and a message of kindness. Now remember, the Ammonites are their enemies, but David is going to send, because that's a kind thing to do. It seems that upon his death, David decided to send a kind message. His name was Hanan, I believe. And he was the son of the deceased king of the Amorites. And David wanted to send him this notice of condolence and remembered some favor, and we aren't told what it was, some favor that David had received from this king earlier on. So David said in verse 2, "He showed kindness to me, so I want to show kindness to his son and keep up a friendly correspondence with him, just like I have done to Mephibosheth that we studied last week for Jonathan's sake." So the only difference here now is David's dealing with a heathen king and his son. And so the responses are totally different than what happened last week with Mephibosheth. So David sent out his men as kindness to the son of Hanan, but the Ammonites, they didn't quite trust this. They treated him with mistrust and with contempt. David's friendly gesture was completely misunderstood. Israel, instead of Hanan's leaders welcoming David's messengers with his kindness, they believed that he intended to attack them. So they said to their king, "Don't be fooled. David's not honoring your father. Don't think for a minute that he sent comforters to you. Don't be fooled," they told him. "He sent them here to search out our city. He sent them here to spy on us so that he can overthrow our city. They're here under pretense of being comforters to you, but they aren't. They're spies." And the king listened to this spiteful suggestion. And he showed his awful contempt for David's messengers by disgracing them, and David as well. Because these were David's men of honor. They represented David himself. And they'd come to the Ammonites unarmed, and Haman treated them like they were rogues, like they were vagabonds, like they were spies, like they were enemies. And worse, because he had them shave off the beards of these messengers that David had sent, shaved off their beards. And not only that, to cut off half their clothes, exposing half of their bodies naked, to the contempt, to the ridicule of all of his servants, so that they could laugh at him and make fun of them. And what an insult this was. You can't think of a way to be more thoroughly humiliated than David's ambassadors were. This seems to have been, by Haman, a challenge to war, whereas David wanted to be just a gesture of goodwill and peace. Now, beards, as we know, beards were held in very high respect among the Jews. They wore them long as an honor to make them appear older and more grave and more pious. So the loss of their clothes could quickly be remedied. They could get more clothes and cover their bodies up, but it's going to take a while for their beards to grow out again. So when David found out what had happened to his messengers, he sent some other men to them. He sent some men to his messengers that had been treated like this to let him know that he was very, very upset and that he would avenge those evil acts of Haman against them. And it would be soon. It wouldn't take long. So he advised his men to stay at a private place in Jericho where they wouldn't have to be seen until half their beards, which had been cut off, had grown back long enough that they could cut the other side off and have it look even. Might not be as long as they used to be, but at least it would be even and they wouldn't make fun of them anymore. So when the Ammonites heard that David was very upset, what did they say? They say, oh, we stank before him. They prepared for war, and rightfully so. They should have known that David wasn't going to allow them to treat any of his men so disgracefully as this. Yet, they didn't consider either how terribly unfit and how unable they were, even with their thousands, to start a war with David. They soon found out that they were an unequal match for David and all of his mighty men. So they hired the Syrians to come over and help them. They hired altogether 33,000 men from the Syrians to help them fight against David's army. And of course, when David heard about this, he sent Joab and all of his best mighty men and the battle begins. Now Joab was David's chief officer over all the army. So he got him and they got it organized and the battle was on. And that's where our lesson begins today. So let's read just verse 8 as we begin our lesson today. The children of Ammon came out and put the battle in array at their entry in of the gate. And the Syrians of Zobah and Rehob and Ishtaol and Mecca were by themselves in the field. Now we've learned that the Ammonites had hired 33,000 Syrians to help them fight. And actually they paid them. They paid them 1,000 talents of silver to come and help them fight. So you see this insult to David turned out to be a pretty costly affair for them. Now it was to David's wisdom and training as a mighty warrior that he decided to carry this war into the country of the Ammonites and to fight them at the gate of their own capital city. Not on his own land, but on their land, where they pitched a guard to protect their coast. Now David was very wise in doing this, to keep the war away from his own people. So preparation was made for battle by both sides. Let's read now verses 9 through 11. When Joab saw that the front of the battle was against him in 4 all the choice men of Israel, and put them in array against the Syrians. The rest of the people he delivered in the hand of Abishai, his brother, that he might put them in array against the children of Ammon. And he said, if the Syrians be too strong for me, then thou shalt help me. But the children of Ammon be too strong for thee, then I'll come and I'll help thee. Okay, so in preparation for the battle, David's enemies divided themselves into two parts, two divisions. One of their own, Ammonite division, and the other of the Syrians. And the Ammonite division was posted at the gate of their own city, and the Syrian division was placed out in the field, at a distance, out of the city, in the field. So that those of the Syrians out in the field could charge David's army from the rear, and the Ammonites could fight them up front. See, they thought they were going to get in between them. Their plan, that was their plan. It was to catch David's army in between these two divisions. But Joab, now he's very wise. He's the general of David's army. And he soon figured out their plan of attack. So, accordingly, what does he do? Well, he divides his men also. And the choices of the men he took under his own command, probably the ones that he knew to be more experienced and versed in battle. So these men he took with him, and he took them out into the field. Now he's at the rear, out in the field, where the Syrians are stationed. And the rest of David's army he put under the command of his brother Abishai. And they were placed up front. They were placed up front at the gate of the city, the Ammonite city, to fight against the Ammonites. And his keen eye as a general looked well at the advantages and the dangers of this division. And no doubt, both his conduct and his courage in making this decision was very serious. It was a very serious thing. So he now threw his whole force between his enemy's two divisions. He organized his army into two parts, one facing the Ammonites there at the city gate, the other the Syrians out in the field. See, they're cutting the enemy forces in two. That's what he's doing. And realizing how dangerous this was, Joab gave his force a little speech before the battle began. Not a long speech, but it was a brave speech. And once he said to his brother, he said this, now, brother, he says, if the Syrians get to be too strong for me out there in the field, I'm going to call for you and you come and help me. And if the Ammonites up there at the city gates prove to get a little too strong for you, you call for me and I'll come and I'll help you. So Joab realized this was a very dangerous situation. He was well aware that if the Ammonites would rush upon Abishai in full force and fury, they were sure of victory. And that perhaps the men that were with him then would become disheartened, lose their faith in their leader, and give way and lose the battle. So Joab left these ringing words, these parting words to his brother, not knowing if they'd ever meet again. And he said, if the Syrians are going to get too strong for you, I'm going to come and help you. And if the Ammonites are too strong for me, I want you to come and help me, because if Abishai was crushed, Joab would be in even worse peril. So Joab appears at his best here. Not only did he show his military uniqueness and his pious religious patriotism, but he showed his love for God and for God's people. Now let's read verse 12, just verse 12 here. He said, be of good courage, and let us slay the men for our people, and for the cities of our God, and the Lord do that which seemeth him good. So Joab bravely encourages himself, he encourages his brother, and the rest of his officers and soldiers to do their utmost. So he animated his own men much more furiously. He said, be of good courage, and let's fight for our people. Let's fight for the cities of God, for the public safety, for the welfare, for God and our country. Let's be valiant from the principle of love for Israel and love for God. Because he said to them, they are God's cities. The ones we're fighting for and defending are God's cities. And then notice what he says. He says, when we have done our part, as best we can, then let the Lord do what seems good to him. And he piously leaves it all up to God. Let God's work be done by us, and then let God's will be done concerning us. Let him do as he pleases. So he leaves the whole battle in the hands of God. In other words, he's saying the battle is the Lord's. And if God be for us, who can be against us? Who can be against us? I didn't say that to the church today. I have to say that to myself. I've got a boring battle going on. My family, the devil's trying to kill us all. Then I say, devil, God is for us. Who can be against us? And now the attack begins. So let's read verses 13 through 19 together. And Joab drew nigh, and the people that were with him, unto the battle against the Syrians, and they fled before him. The children of Ammon saw that the Syrians were fled, and they fled also before Abishai, and entered into the city. So Joab returned from the children of Ammon, and came to Jerusalem. And when the Syrians saw that they were smitten before Israel, they gathered themselves together, and had a reserve sent and brought out the Syrians that were beyond the river. And they came to Hebron, and Shobach, the captain of the hosts of Hadarezer, went before them. And when it was told David, he gathered all Israel together, and he passed over Jordan, and he came to Hebron. And the Syrians set themselves in array against David, and fought with him. And the Syrians fled before Israel. And David slew the men of 700 chariots of the Syrians, and 40,000 horsemen, and he smote Shobach, the captain of their host, who died there. And all the kings that were servants to Hadarezer saw that they were smitten before Israel. They made peace with Israel, and they served them. So the Syrians feared to help the children of Ammon anymore. What a battle that must have been. Now remember, Joab and his troops, where are they? They're stationed outside of the city. They're stationed out in the field at the rear against the Syrians, the stronger of the two forces. And Abishai is stationed up there at the gate of the city against the Ammonites in the front. So now the battle begins, and notice the tactics that Joab used. He began the attack first against the Syrians, while Abishai up there in the city watched the gates, and he held the Ammonites in check. And Joab's tactics worked. They were successful. He proved to be too strong for both the Syrians and the Ammonites, because the Syrians were rooted out by Joab, and the Ammonites were defeated by Abishai. So the Syrians fled, and the Ammonites, when they saw that, now the whole army, they fled also. And the whole army of Israel had come against them. Turned right around, they turned right around. They didn't give Abishai any more problems. They turned right about around, and they ran back for safety into their city, because all of the Syrians out there in the field had fled too. So they went back into their city. And this ended, and abruptly ended, their first proud effort to defeat, to humiliate King David and all of the Israelites. They had hired troops. They paid the Syrians a lot of money to come and help them fight and to reinforce their Ammonite army. But the hired troops they had leaned so heavily upon, so much depended upon, turned out to be totally untrustworthy. They were cowards. They ran. So the wretched Ammonites found themselves not only minus thousands of dollars, but without victory and without any honor. So now Joab takes his army. He just goes back to Jerusalem. He's done. Now it seems strange that he didn't follow up with this victory. It seems strange that he didn't go into the city after those Ammonites. Seems as though he could have easily done this at this time. We don't know why he didn't do it, but maybe his army was tired and exhausted, or they had run out of weapons, run out of supplies. Whatever, we don't know. Whatever may have been the reason, this delay gave those Ammonites time to rally, and now they're going to make a new attempt, another attempt to regain their lost honor and to check the progress of David's victorious army. So we're told here that they gathered themselves together. We're told that forces of the Ammonites rallied, and this time they called for help from the Syrians on the other side of the Euphrates River. There's some over there too, and this is who they called on now. Well, David heard about it. When he heard about this, he decided not to wait until they attacked this time, but he went in person. He went at the head of his army, and he gathered all of Israel together. He crossed over the Jordan River into Helam. This was the city of the Ammonites. This was the city they fled into. And there they met the Syrian army head on, and the Syrian war with all of David's army, under his own private leadership, was the consequence. And David now took to the field in person. We don't know whether Joab was with him or not, but probably most likely he was. Probably he was over in the south again, holding the Ammonites in check while David fought the Syrians. And he fought them victoriously, because we're told that in this battle, David killed 40,000 of the Syrians' horsemen, those that drove those chariots. And he killed the captain of the Syrian army, David killed. So again, David delivered a crushing blow over his enemies. And they never did recover for the rest of his reign. As long as he was king, the Ammonites never did recover. Or even during Solomon's reign, they did not recover, because the king of the Syrians and all the petty kings that were under him now got smart. And they acknowledged the supremacy of King David. And they paid tribute to him. It was a tremendous victory for David. And it established him without a doubt as the great ruler of that day. So the armies of David were blessed, and God kept the covenant which he had made to Abraham way back in Genesis 15, the 18th verse, which said this again, "Unto thy seed have I given this land from the river of Egypt unto the great river Euphrates." So now in the space of 19 or 20 years, David has finished it gloriously, victoriously, the sum of 8 wars, all righteously undertaken under God's eye, and all of them terminated in victory. And this last victory was soon followed by the complete conquest of the Amorites, who had been abandoned by their allies, Syria. And you know, it's dangerous to help those that have God against them. Better not do that. Because when they fall, you're going to fall too. Well, church, we are in a warfare today, and I don't need to tell any of you that. And it is truly a spiritual warfare. We're just caught up with politics, and of course Tuesday will be D-Day. And I just want to encourage you. I truly believe in my heart that it matters. It matters on our level, but truly it matters not who takes that office or who God allows, and God will allow who he wants into that office. Doesn't mean we shouldn't vote, but he will allow who he wants. And whomever is in there, don't fear. God is sovereign. God is in control. Amen. Our Bible in Romans tells us that he is the one that makes the government work. He is sovereign. He says, those kings, those presidents, those queens, they're my servants. So don't worry who gets in. You know, try to be calm. Quietness and content is our strength today. though the world might fear, we know that God is sovereign over all, and that he will use whatever man he can use to bring forth the end-time prophecies, which are pretty much all fulfilled now. We just are waiting for the manifestation of them. We're in a warfare, and we need courage, and we need to trust in God the way David did when he went into battle. And we need to help one another. We need to encourage one another. You know as well as I do. I get my phone rings off the wall all day, every week of the day for prayer. People are discouraged. People are fearful today. You know, if the COVID doesn't get them, they think the cancer is going to get them, or what else, because that's what we see on the media. I don't turn that online, but many people just, they go from station to station to see what's up next. Well, you better stop doing that, because there's nothing good news coming out of your TVs or your radios today. But we need to trust in God, and we need to help one another. Because the soul, I tell you, church, the soul of America today is at stake. And we need to ask God, we need to pray that he intervene in this. And we need to stand up, and the church needs to get up and get out from behind their closets and out there and be bold and do what they should have done long ago, and that's to speak out. But let me encourage you today with the golden text. And it's from David's Psalm 27. And I'd just like to make it a little more personal. So I'm going to read it like this. The Lord is your light. The Lord is your salvation. Whom should you fear? The Lord is the strength of your life. Of whom should you be afraid? Just make it personal. And that is so true. So be strong. Be of good courage. Be not afraid. Neither be dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with you wherever you go. And that's Joshua. Thank you, Jesus. We're going to make it through.
Yes, we
And you know what? We know he's going to win, don't we already?
Yes.
Because we're told. We read that. Go back in the book. It's just come quickly, Jesus.
Yes.
Any comments? So now, next week, we'll get into the other side of David.
Yeah.
But I love the Bible. I love it because, God didn't just tell us about the prophets and the saints and the holy men. He showed us all of their weaknesses, and he showed us all of their failures. He showed us Moses' failure, David's failure, Elijah's failure. He didn't just tell us the good things. He told us that they were like us. They failed too, but with God, God will prevail. Yeah. He's your strength. He's your salvation. And when they says he's your salvation, that means he's your help. He's your help. Any comments? Thank you, Jesus. Father, we just receive your word, and I pray, God, that every one of us would receive that spirit of David that had that courage and such trust in you that he just went forward. Every time there was a battle to fight, he just left it up to you. And I pray, God, that we can somehow have that spirit of David as we fight this spiritual warfare in our world of peril today.